Most of you probably know that ancient and medieval states did not have official flags. This just wasn't really a custom before the modern era. So no, the Eastern Roman Empire, strictly speaking, did not have a national flag. But what would have been its flag if the Roman state survived long enough to have one? Or what if we were making, say, a historical strategy game, and needed a flag for our Byzantine faction? The designs of first country flags were based on battlefield standards, personal heraldry and naval ensigns, and the Eastern Romans had all of those, at least in some form. So in this video we're going to examine them and figure out which one would have been the best candidate for the official flag of the Eastern Roman Empire. As far as the battlefield standards go, there was never a shortage of them throughout all of Roman history. Each legion of ancient Rome carried a vexillum, a type of protoflag, adorned by a silver or bronze animal figure. In the late Republic, other animals were discarded in favor of the eagle, so the aquila became an iconic Roman symbol. Today, when someone needs to come up with a flag for the classical Roman Empire, they're almost sure to use an eagle, a laurel wreath, or the letters SPQR. In the early 4th century, Constantine the Great ushered in a new imperial era by making Christianity the favored religion and building a new capital at the site of the ancient city of Byzantium. The first battle standard of this new Roman Empire was the labarum. There are many legends surrounding its origin and appearance. According to Eusebius, while marching his army to battle, Constantine looked up at the sun and saw a cross of light, and with it the words, "With this conquer." The following night, Christ visited Constantine in his sleep and explained to him that he should use the cross as the battle standard against his enemies. Eusebius also gives a detailed description of Constantine's banner. A long spear, overlaid with gold, formed the figure of the cross by means of a transverse bar laid over it. On the top was fixed a wreath of gold and precious stones, and within this, the symbol of the Saviour's name, the letter Rho being intersected by He in its center. From the crossbar of the spear was suspended a cloth, a royal piece covered with a profuse embroidery of the most brilliant precious stones, and also richly interlaced with gold. This banner was of a square form, and the upright staff, whose lower section was of great length, bore a golden half-length portrait of the pious emperor and his children on its upper part, beneath the trophy of the cross, and immediately above the embroidered banner. The labarum is clearly an evolution of the classical Roman vexillum. The image of the emperor was a traditional decoration of the legion's battle standards. Constantine's only innovation was the Chi Rho, the monogram of Christ. Eusebius' version was also not the only one used. Later Roman coins show us the types of labara that have the portraits placed on the banner, and others that have the Chi Rho on the flag and an eagle on the top. The Chi Rho design, however, had only been used as a battle standard for a couple of centuries. In the 5th century, it vanished from iconographic sources, and within the first decades of the 6th, it disappeared from coins as well. Later in Byzantine history, the word labarum came to describe a much smaller device. It took the form of either an encrusted piece of cloth or a rigid plaque hanging from a crossbar on a long scepter. We see Eastern Roman emperors wielding these mini labaras on coins and artifacts from later centuries. This time, however, it's not an army banner, but a part of the ceremonial regalia, like the scepter and the orb. In the Middle Byzantine period, the main Roman army standard was called the skeptron. A skeptron usually took the form of a long staff, topped with a golden or silver cross. Constantine Porphyrogenitos describes 2 different types of skeptra. Some were just crosses on a long spear, while those of the Roman type were supposed to have a piece of cloth on a crossbar. These skeptra were further descendants of the vexillum, and the predecessors of the types of banners that are still used in Christian religious processions, like the Italian gonfalon or the Slavic horug. Another battle standard used in the medieval Roman army was called the Draco. The Draco was a windsock attached to a metal dragon head. The Romans adopted it from their nomadic neighbors around the turn of the 3rd century and continued to use it as a cavalry standard well into the Byzantine era. The dragon heads are attested to in the sources up to the 13th century, and even as late as the 14th, there were ceremonial flags with images of dragons. It's hard to say when exactly the transition from the vertical to horizontal flags took place. There are some indications that horizontal flags have been used as early as the 5th century. The Strategikon of Emperor Maurikios, written in that era, describes flags that were employed for military organization. Flag elements called flammula, the streamers, decorated the banners of different army units. These streamers had nothing to do with twitch, but were instead colored ribbons that flowed in the wind like streams. It's still up to debate if those flags were hoisted vertically or horizontally. However, it's certain that the word flammulon later came to mean the horizontal flag, like the ones we're used to. As far as images on the flags go, the important ones included the cross, the emperor, Virgin Mary, and other saints. A mention of a flammula with a cross as the main imperial banner comes to us from the Book of Ceremonies. It speaks of the royal spear with the flag that held the honest, life-giving victorious cross. Michael Psellos writes that in one of the battles, Basil II fought with the sword in one hand, and the image of the mother of the verb in the other. This probably refers to a small vexillum with an icon, because it would be hard to fight with a full-sized banner in one hand. Banners with images of the emperor have been a tradition in classical Rome, and are widely attested in Byzantine sources as well. Even some of the pagan gods had made it onto Eastern Roman banners. Greek Nike, or Latin Victoria, was a mainstay on the banners of the Old Empire. Indeed, the only surviving Roman vexillum depicts not an eagle, but the goddess of victory. In Christian times, she and the goddess of fortune, Tyche, lost their cult following, but remained as symbolic patrons and guardians of the city of Constantinople. As such, they did not offend Christian sensibilities, and continued to appear in Byzantine iconography for centuries. Pictures of different Byzantine flags can be found in the illustrated chronicle of John Skylitzes from the 11th century. They sport a peculiar red, white and blue color scheme. These have become a sort of go-to Byzantine flags for many history content makers on YouTube and elsewhere on the internet. However, we should not rely too much on these pictures. First, the illustrator of this manuscript was from Norman Sicily, so he probably didn't see any of the Roman flags with his own eyes. Secondly, the blue color is something that we never see mentioned in text. Andrea Babuin, the author of multiple monographs on Eastern Roman standards and insignia, went through a lot of sources that describe Byzantine flags, and the vast majority of the banners in them are red. Gold also comes up on several occasions, and there are mentions of black, white, green, and even pink-colored flags, but no blue. The illustrations, however, show blue on almost every Roman flag. And if we inspect the pictures a bit more closely, we'd find out that the Muslim armies are sometimes depicted under the same banners as the Eastern Romans. Oh, and you know what else is frequently blue in these illustrations? The horses. Now, there are apparently blue, or at least blue-ish horses in real life, but they are extremely rare. In medieval manuscripts, however, blue horses are everywhere. Making the illustrations colorful and vibrant was definitely seen as more important than the accuracy. So I think we should rely on these images for the historical flag colors, no more than we use them for the historical horse colors. There are a few sentences scattered around Byzantine sources that suggest another type of flag. It is known from several chronicles that the main imperial battle standard, used in the 11th century, could be pointed in a direction. Nikitas Choniates describes a negotiation under an imperial banner that is pointed in the direction of the enemy front. In battle, the direction of the flag signaled the advance or retreat. At Manzikert, a bungled turn of a flag caused confusion in the Roman ranks and led to a crushing defeat. It is impossible to turn a cloth or the flag at will unless its top is fixed to a bar. Small flags like this were known back in antiquity, so some historians argue that the Byzantine imperial battle flag could also have this configuration. Judging by the sheer variety of the banners that we've seen so far, it's fair to say that up to this point, There was no single design that could qualify as the official state flag. Different standards like the labarum or the cross-bearing sceptra met some of the criteria, but none of them stood out as the most important one. Only closer to the 13th century we finally get something resembling a country flag. The timing is not a coincidence. There were two important developments happening in Europe around this time. First, in the High Middle Ages, Western Europeans began their obsession with heraldry and started designing coats of arms for themselves and everyone around them. It became especially fashionable to commission armorials, whole books of coats of arms. The more different images there were in the book, the more prestigious it was for the one who had commissioned it, so the heraldess didn't shy away from inventing crests for people in states that never actually had any heraldry. Secondly, Italian and Portuguese cartographers started compiling detailed maps of the Mediterranean to chart trade routes. They used flags to denote control of the important ports, so now every state that appeared on these maps received a unique maritime ensign. These Western sources list two distinct designs for the coat of arms and flag of Byzantium, the two-headed eagle and the Tetragrammatic Cross. I have talked at length about the two-headed eagle in my previous video. Long story short, up until the last few decades of the empire's existence, it wasn't a symbol of the state, but a token of rank. Only court office holders one step below the emperor were permitted to display the double-headed eagle on their garments. The penultimate Roman emperor John VIII gave the eagle a more formal status by using it as his seal, so later Western armorials sometimes display it as a coat of arms of Constantinople. Overall, with some caveats, the double-headed eagle can be called the symbol of the Eastern Roman Empire in later centuries, but as far as the flags go, it doesn't really fit. There are no mentions of battlefield standards or any other types of banners with a two-headed eagle, so it would be a long stretch to put it forward as a prototype of a Byzantine national flag. The second popular design is the so-called Tetragrammatic Cross. It's been listed as the coat of arms of the Eastern Roman Empire in Sigur's roll, Armorial Le Breton, and that most credible of all Western historical sources, Europa Universalis Games by Paradox Interactive. And apparently there's been some confusion about its authenticity among Byzantine enjoyers, with a lot of people saying it should not be a flag of Eastern Rome. There are forum posts arguing about it from back in 2002, and with the EU4 successor announcement on the horizon, there are sure to be more debates on this topic. So let's try to settle this discussion. The flag in question has a golden cross on a red field, with 4 Greek letters beta in each of its corners. Or are those fire steels? Right away we got ourselves a point of contention. Some sources say that these are letters, others that these are fire strikers. So what exactly are they? In modern heraldry, these types of crosses with smaller emblems in each corner are called cantoned. Obviously they weren't called that in the early Byzantine Empire, but the composition itself was popular. The Eastern Romans were big fans of tetragrams, abbreviations consisting of 4 letters, or sometimes pairs of letters, which had special meaning. The most popular of them was this one, which means Jesus Christ conquers. It was normally inscribed in the 4 corners of the cross. Next in popularity was Phos Christou pheni passin. The light of Christ is visible everywhere. There were also many other tetragrams, and those made up of 4 of the same letter formed their own subcategory. A single beta appeared on coins from the Nicaean Empire in the 13th century, and it was joined by another one at the time of later Lascarids and early Paleologi. Michael VIII and his successors have minted coins with 4 betas in a cross, in a manner of a traditional tetragram. The way it ended up as the Byzantine coat of arms is uncertain. The first time it appears in this context is in the Wienerberg Armorial. This coat of arms is supposed to represent the King Paleolog. Next to it is the King of Constantinople, whose shield looks very similar, but instead of letters, it has smaller ringed crosses in its quarters. You may know this one as the coat of arms of the Latin Empire. The cantoned crosses were very popular among the Crusaders, as many of them wanted to model their heraldry after the Kingdom of Jerusalem. The members of the Courtenay dynasty that ruled Constantinople since 1216 were among those, so they have a similar cantoned golden cross, but with a red field. and with quarters filled with smaller crosses. We've seen that many Eastern Roman banners had red fields and golden decorations, so the choice of color palettes appears to be in line with Byzantine tradition. The king Palaeolog, who, according to the Memorial, had a coat of arms with 4 letters, was Emperor Michael Palaiologos, who recaptured Constantinople from the Crusaders in 1261. We have seen the 4 betas tetragram on his coins, but it is unclear if he also used this emblem as a coat of arms or a flag. Traditionally, Eastern Romans didn't have Western-style heraldry, and instead used familial monograms. It's possible that at that time the tetragram wasn't the primary imperial emblem, and it was Western influence that spurred its elevation to a higher status later on. The meaning of the 4 betas is still debated. No Byzantine source tells us for certain what the tetragram is supposed to mean. A 17th century European almanac deciphered it as Vasilevs Vasileon Vasilevon Vasilevsin, King of Kings ruling over kings, implying that the Eastern Roman emperors called themselves Kings of Kings. However, later historians have demonstrated that the King of Kings in question is probably Jesus Christ, and the invocation should be read as King of Kings, help the King. Regardless of the exact meaning, it's pretty evident that these were indeed Greek letters beta, so why would anyone suggest that they are fire strikers? This was the doing of the Western heraldists. Words and letters were frowned upon or even forbidden by European heraldic traditions. Medieval heralds relied primarily on blazons, verbal descriptions of the coats of arms. So it was important that even an illiterate peasant could tell what was drawn on a shield. You could expect people to recognize lions and dragons from the Bible, but asking them to know what letters look like was a bit too much. The tetragram that the Europeans took for the Eastern Roman coat of arms already had letters in it, so to describe them, the heraldists used the letter's similarity to a fire striker, an everyday implement that any medieval person would know. The fire strikers, however, could have a variety of forms. Thus, the image of the Byzantine shield looks different from one armorial to another, because different heraldists used their favorite fire striker shape. This Western interpretation became so widely accepted that even native Byzantines started using it. A 14th century treaty on offices by Pseudo-Kodinos calls them fire strikers, as if the author didn't know their original meaning. On the other hand, Western heraldists in the 15th century learned what these symbols are and identified them correctly as letters. The heraldist of Charles VII says that they are Greek letters called betex. So what makes us suggest that this coat of arms was also a flag? The first clue comes from the portolans. The portolans are Renaissance-era nautical charts, made mainly in Italy, Catalonia and Portugal. Their big advantage over other maps of the time was that they were actually fairly detailed and accurate. The oldest portolan with flags is the Atlas of Angelina Dulcert, and it displays a Tetragrammatic Cross on Philadelphia, Constantinople and Do Castelli. This convention continued on in pretty much every nautical chart until the fall of the empire. There is also a written account of a Castilian mendicant friar called Libro del Conocimiento de Todos los Reinos, the Book of Knowledge of All Kingdoms. It tells about the author's journey around the Mediterranean. Among other cities, the friar claims to have visited Thessaloniki and Constantinople. Here's how he describes the Byzantine lands. The Greek Empire consists of many separate provinces. The insignia of this land's king is a standard of crimson color with a golden cross and 4 golden chain links. The book used to be considered an authentic traveling account, but now most historians agree that the author probably never left his monastery and simply wrote his tales while meditating over one of the maps. Regardless of the authenticity, however, it points to the fact that 14th century Europeans firmly believed this cross to be the flag of the empire. The illustrations from the history of the conquest of Constantinople confirm this as well. Of course, we could have easily dismissed it all as a product of silly Westerners mistaking a Byzantine tetragram for a coat of arms and just copying from one another, if there were no Eastern Roman sources confirming its usage. Luckily for us, there actually are some. First, there are 2 marble plates from the 14th century Constantinople, one from the palace of Porphyrogenitos and one from Galata, each with a Tetragrammatic Cross. Secondly, there's ample evidence in the aforementioned treaty by Pseudo-Kodinos. The author of the treaty calls it the usual imperial banner. According to his text, it was raised on ships and on towers of fortified cities. The flag is called Divelion, which means that it had two tails, like what's called a swallowtail flag in modern vexillology. Pseudo-Kodinos tells us that when the emperor goes on campaign, he is always preceded by the Divelion. The treaty also describes a full procession of imperial banners. There are 13 flags in total. The imperial Divelion takes the lead, followed by 6 pairs of banners, each of its own type. One has the Archistrategos, Archangel Michael. Another one with 8 streamers, called the Octapodion, has images of holy prelates. Next in line are the banners with 4 great warrior saints, Demetrius, Procopius, and 2 Theodores. Then there is mounted St. George striking down a serpent. 2 flags with a dragon that probably belong to the cavalry units. And the final 2 with images of the emperor on horseback. We don't know the exact adoption date of the Divelion. Pseudo-Kodinos' treaty was written between 1347 and 1368, so its elevation to the imperial status had already happened by this time. The Wienerberg Armorial is dated to 1265, and there's also a Byzantine miniature with Phobetus cross from the first half of the 13th century. Likely this flag design had been known as early as 1200, but was just one among many before the Paleologos period. However, since we have multiple sources confirming that the cross with 4 betas had been used as an imperial coat of arms, as a battlefield standard, and as a maritime ensign, I think we can safely state that it would be the primary candidate for the flag of the late Eastern Roman Empire. Had Byzantium continued on into the early modern era, its first flag would have likely been based on the Divelion. When it comes to earlier centuries, the Cairo Labarum would be a fitting banner for the period from the 4th to the 6th, but past that a cross on a field should probably be used instead. A cavalry cross potent is a good candidate for the next 2 centuries, while later a regular cross, and the one cantoned with circles, supplanted it in imperial iconography before the emergence of the 4 betas tetragram. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have some questions left on the topic, feel free to ask them in the comments. I'd like to thank my Patreon supporters, Mulai Cherkawi, Conventus Orbis, Pikimis, Mikius Porcius, Simon Baumgartner, and others. And for the rest of you, thanks a lot for watching to the end, and I will see you in the next one.